We are continuing to read the book of Jasher because it lines up with the chapters in Genesis. We were left at chapter 11, so let's read it. And Nimrod, son of Cush, was still in the land of Shinar, and he reigned over it and dwelt there, and he built cities in the land of Shinar. And these are the names of the 4 cities which he built, and he called their names after the occurrences that happened to them in the building of the tower. And he called the first Babel, saying, because the Lord there confounded the language of the whole earth. And the name of the second he called Erech, because from there God dispersed them. And the third he called Ehed, saying, there was a great battle at that place. And the fourth he called Kalna, because his princes and mighty men were consumed there, and they vexed the Lord. They rebelled and transgressed against him. And when Nimrod had built the cities in the land of Shinar, he placed in them the remainder of his people, his princes, and his mighty men that were left in his kingdom. And all of this happened after the Tower of Babel was destroyed. A lot of people died. A lot of people spread across the earth, but his kingdom was in Shinar, and he was still there with his people. And Nimrod dwelt in Babel, and he there renewed his reign over the rest of his subjects, and he reigned securely, and the subjects and princes of Nimrod called his name Amraphel, saying that the tower, his princes and men fell through his means. At the tower. Whatever that means, they fell through his means. And notwithstanding this, Nimrod did not return to the Lord, and he continued in wickedness and teaching wickedness to the sons of men. And Mardon, his son, was worse than his father, and continued to add to the abominations of his father. And he caused the sons of men to sin. Therefore it is said, from the wicked goes out wickedness. At that time there was war between the families of the children of Ham, as they were dwelling in the cities which they had built. And Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, went away from the families of the children of Ham, and he fought with them, and he subdued them. And he went to the 5 cities of the plain, and he fought against them, and he subdued them, and they were under his control. And they served him 12 years, and they gave him a yearly tax. At that time died Nahor, son of Serug, in the 49th year of the life of Abraham, son of Terah. And in the 50th year of the life of Abraham, son of Terah, Abram came out from the house of Norah and went to his father's house. And Abram knew the Lord, and he went in his ways and instructions, and the Lord his God was with him. And Terah his father was in those days still captain of the host of King Nimrod, and he still followed strange gods. And Abram came to his father's house, and saw 12 gods standing there in their temples, and the anger of Abram was kindled when he saw these images in his father's house. And Abram said, as the Lord lives, these images will not remain in my father's house. So will the Lord who created me do unto me, if in 3 days' time I do not break them all. And Abram went from them, and his anger burned within him. And Abram hastened and went from the chamber to his father's outer court, and he found his father sitting in the court, and all his servants with him. And Abram came and sat before him. And Abram asked his father, saying, Father, tell me, where is God who created heaven and earth, and all the sons of men upon earth, and who created you and me? And Terah answered his son Abram and said, Behold, those who created us are all with us in the house. That's so strange. And Abram said to his father, My Lord, shew them to me, I pray you. And Terah brought Abram into the chamber of the inner court, and Abram saw, and behold, the whole room was full of gods of wood and stone, 12 great images, and others less than they, without number. Wow. It's like little toys. And Terah said to his son, Behold, these are they which made all you see upon earth, and which created me and you and all mankind. And Terah bowed down to his gods, and he then went away from them, and Abram his son went away with him. How could they make you if you made them? Doesn't make any sense. How can you be a leader in power and be so dumb? I don't get it. Okay. And when Abram had gone from them, he went to his mother and sat before her. And he said to his mother, Behold, my father has shown me those who made heaven and earth, and all the sons of men. Now therefore, hasten and fetch a kid from the flock, and make of it savory meat, that I may bring it to my father's gods as an offering for them to eat. Perhaps I may therefore become acceptable to them. And his mother did so, and she fetched the kid, and made savory meat thereof, and brought it to Abram. And Abram took the savory meat from his mother, and brought it before his father's gods. And he drew nigh to them, that they might eat, and Terah his father did not know of it. And Abram saw on the day when he was sitting among them, that they had no voice, no hearing, no motion, and not one of them could stretch out his hand to eat. And Abram mocked them and said, Surely the savory meat that I prepared has not pleased them. Or perhaps it was too little for them, and for that reason they would not eat. Therefore tomorrow I will prepare fresh savory meat, better and more plentiful than this, in order that I may see the result. And it was on the next day that Abram directed his mother concerning the savory meat, and his mother rose and fetched 3 fine kids from the flock. And she made of them some excellent savory meat, such as her son was fond of, and she gave it to her son Abram, and Terah his father did not know of it. I think when it says kids from the flock, it means lambs. I don't think it means children. It's a weird translation. And Abram took the savory meat from his mother, and brought it before his father's gods into the chamber, and he came nigh unto them, that they might eat. And he placed it before them, and Abram sat before them all day, thinking perhaps they might eat. And Abram viewed them, and behold, they had neither voice nor hearing, nor did one of them stretch out his hand to the meat to eat. And in the evening of that day, in that house, Abram was clothed with the Spirit of God. And he called out and said, Woe unto my father and this wicked generation, whose hearts are all inclined to vanity, who serve these idols of wood and stone, which can neither eat, smell, hear, nor speak, who have mouths without speech, eyes without sight, ears without hearing, hands without feeling, and legs which cannot move. Like them are those that made them and that trust in them. And when Abram saw all of these things, his anger was kindled against his father, and he hastened and took a hatchet in his hand, and came unto the chamber of the gods, and he broke all his father's gods. And when he had done breaking the images, he placed the hatchet in the hand of the great God which was there before them, and he went out. And Terah his father came home, for he had heard at the door the sound of the striking of the hatchet. So Terah came into the house to know what this was about. And Terah, having heard the noise of the hatchet in the room of images, ran to the room to the images, and he met Abram going out. And Terah entered the room and found all the idols fallen down and broken, and the hatchet in the hand of the largest, which was not broken, and the savory meat which Abram his son had made was still before them. And when Terah saw this, his anger was greatly kindled, and he hastened and went from the room to Abram. And he found Abram his son still sitting in the house, and he said to him, What is this work you had done to my gods? And Abram answered Terah his father, and he said, Not so, my lord, for I brought savory meat before them, and when I came nigh to them with the meat that they might eat, they all at once stretched out their hands to eat before the great one had put out his hand to eat. And he, the large one, saw their works that they did before him, and his anger was violently kindled against them. And he went and took the hatchet that was in the house, and came to them and broke them all. And behold, the hatchet is yet in his hand, as you see. And Terah's anger was kindled against his son Abram when he spoke this. And Terah said to Abram his son in his anger, "What is this tale that you have told? You speak lies to me. Is there in this God's spirit sorrow power to do all you have told me? Are they not wood and stone, and have I not myself made them? And can you speak such lies, saying that the large God that was with them smote them? It is you that did place the hatchet in his hands, and then say he smote them all." And Abram answered his father and said to him, "And how can you then serve these idols in whom there is no power to do anything? Can those idols in which you trust deliver you? Can they hear your prayers when you call upon them? Can they deliver you from the hands of your enemies? Or will they fight your battles for you against your enemies, that you should serve wood and stone which can neither speak nor hear? And now surely it is not good for you, nor the sons of man that are connected with you, to do these things. Are you so silly, so foolish, or so short of understanding that you will serve wood and stone, and do after this manner, and forget the Lord God who made heaven and earth, and who created you in the earth, and thereby bring a great evil upon your soul in this matter, by serving stone and wood? Did not our fathers in the days of old sin in this manner, and the Lord God of the universe brought the waters of the flood upon them and destroyed the whole earth? And how can you continue to do this and serve gods of wood and stone, who cannot hear or speak or deliver you from oppression, thereby bringing down the anger of the God of the universe upon you? Now, therefore, my father, stop from this and bring no evil upon your soul and the souls of your household." And Abram hastened and sprang from there before his father, and took the hatchet from his father's largest idol, with which Abram broke it, and ran away. And Terah, seeing all that Abram had done, hastened to go from his house, and he went to the king, and came before Nimrod, and stood before him, and he bowed down to the king. And the king said, "What do you want?" And he said, "I implore you, my lord, to hear me." Oh, this is a long chapter. "Now 50 years back a child was born to me, and thus he had done to my gods, and thus he has spoken. And now therefore, my lord and king, send for him, that he may come before you and judge him according to the law, that we may be delivered from his evil." Talk about the deceived mind. And the king sent 3 men of his servants, and they went and brought Abram before the king. And Nimrod and all his princes and servants were that day sitting before him, and Terah sat also before them. And the king said to Abram, "What is this that you have done to your father and to his gods?" And Abram answered the king in the words that he spoke to his father, and he said, "The large God that was with them in the house did to them what you have heard." And the king said to Abram, "Had they power to speak and eat, and do as you have said?" And Abram answered the king, saying, "And if there be no power in them, why do you serve them and cause the sons of men to err through your follies? Do you imagine that they can deliver you or do anything small or great that you should serve them? And why will you not sense the God of the whole universe, who created you and in whose power it is to kill and keep alive? O foolish, simple, and ignorant king, woe unto you forever. I thought you would teach your servants the upright way, but you have not done this, but have filled the whole earth with your sins and the sins of your people who have followed your ways. Do you not know, or have you not heard, that this evil which you do, our ancestors sinned therein in days of old, and the eternal God brought the waters of the flood upon them and destroyed them all, and also destroyed the whole earth on their account? And will you and your people rise up now and do like unto this work, in order to bring down the anger of the Lord God of the universe, and to bring evil upon you and the whole earth? Now therefore put away this evil deed which you do, and serve the God of the universe, as your soul is in his hands, and then it will be well with you. And if your wicked heart will not hearken to my words, to cause you to forsake your evil ways, and to serve the eternal God, then you will die in shame in the latter days, you, your people, and all who are connected with you, hearing your words or walking in your evil ways. And Abram had ceased speaking before the king and princes. Abram lifted up his eyes to the heavens, and he said, "The Lord sees all the wicked, and he will judge them." Chapter 12. And when the king heard the words of Abram, he ordered him to be put into prison, and Abram was 10 days in prison. And at the end of those days, the king ordered that all the kings, princes, and governors of different provinces and the sages should come before him, and they sat before him, and Abram was still in the house of confinement. And the king said to the princes and sages, "How have you heard what Abram the son of Terah has done to his father? Thus has he done to him, and I ordered him to be brought before me, and thus has he spoken. His heart did not misgive him, neither did he stir in my presence, and behold, now he is confined in the prison. And therefore decide what judgment is due to this man who reviled the king, who spoke and did all the things that you heard." And they all answered the king, saying, "The man who reviles the king should be hanged upon a tree, but having done all the things that he said, and having despised our gods, he must therefore be burned to death, for this is the law in this matter. If it pleases the king to do this, let him order his servants to kindle a fire both night and day in your brick furnace, and then we will cast this man into it." And the king did so, and he commanded his servants that they should prepare a fire for 3 days and 3 nights in the king's furnace that is in Kasdim. And the king ordered them to take Abram from prison and bring him out to be burned. And all the king's servants, princes, lords, governors, and judges, and all the inhabitants of the land, about 900,000 men, stood opposite the furnace to see Abram. And all the women and little ones crowded upon the roofs and towers to see what was happening with Abram. And they all stood together at a distance, and there was not a man left that did not come on that day to behold the scene. The violence. And when Abram was come, the conjurers of the king and the sages saw Abram, and they cried out to the king, saying, "Our sovereign lord, surely this is the man whom we know to have been the child at whose birth the great star swallowed the 4 stars which we declared to the king now 50 years since. And behold, now his father has also transgressed your commands and mocked you by bringing you another child which you did kill." And when the king heard their words, he was exceedingly angry, and he ordered Terah to be brought before him. And the king said, "Have you heard what the conjurers have spoken? Now tell me truly, how did you? And if you will speak truth, you will be acquitted." Lies. That's what they always say. And seeing that the king's anger was so much kindled, Terah said to the king, "My lord and king, you have heard the truth, and what the sages have spoken is right." And the king said, "How could you do this thing, to transgress my orders and to give me a child that you did not beget, and to take value for him?" And Terah answered the king, "Because my tender feelings were excited for my son at that time, and I took a son of my handmaid, and I brought him to the king." And the king said, "Who advised you to this? Tell me, do not hide it from me, and then you will not die." And Terah was greatly terrified in the king's presence, and he said to the king, "It was Haran, my eldest son, who advised me to do this." And Haran was in those days that Abram was born 32 years old. But Haran did not advise his father to anything. For Terah said this to the king in order to deliver his soul from the king, for he feared greatly. So he would throw his son, innocent son, under the bus to save himself? What an evil world! And the king said to Terah, "Haran, your son, who advised you to do this, will die through fire with Abram, for the sentence of death is upon him for having rebelled against the king's desire in doing this thing." So is this why Haran died young? And Haran at that time felt inclined to follow the ways of Abram, but he kept it within himself. And Haran said in his heart, "Behold, now the king has seized Abram on account of the things which Abram did, and it will come to pass that if Abram prevail over the king, I will follow him. But if the king prevail, I will go after the king." And when Terah had spoken this to the king concerning Haran his son, the king ordered Haran to be seized with Abram. And they brought them both, Abram and Haran his brother, to cast them into the fire. And all the inhabitants of the land, and the king's servants and princes, and all the women and little ones were there, standing that day over them. And the king's servants took Abram and his brother, and they stripped them of all their clothes, excepting their lower garments which were upon them. And they bound their hands and feet with linen cords, and the servants of the king lifted them up and cast them both into the furnace. And the Lord loved Abram, and he had compassion over him. And the Lord came down and delivered Abram from the fire, and he was now burned. But all the cords with which they were bound burned, while Abram remained and walked about in the fire. And Haran died when they had cast him into the fire, and he was burned to ashes, for his heart was not perfect with the Lord. And those men who cast him into the fire, the flame of the fire spread over them, and they were burned, and 12 of those men died. Very similar to the story of Daniel and his friends in the Bible. And Abram walked in the, not Daniel, but Daniel's friends. And Abram walked in the midst of the fire 3 days and 3 nights, and all the servants of the king saw him walking in the fire, and they came and told the king, saying, Behold, we have seen Abram walking about in the midst of the fire, and even the lower garments which are upon him are not burned, but the cord with which he was bound is burned. And when the king heard their words, his heart fainted, and he would not believe them. So he sent other faithful princes to see this matter, and they went inside and told it to the king. And the king rose to go and see it, and he saw Abram walking to and fro in the midst of the fire, and he saw Haran's body burned, and the king wondered greatly. And the king ordered Abram to be taken out from the fire, and his servants approached to take him out, and they could not, for the fire was round about, and the flame was sending toward them from the furnace. And the king's servants fled from it, and the king rebuked them, saying, Make haste and bring Abram out of the fire, that you will not die. Well, they will die if they do. And the servants of the king again approached to bring Abram out, and the flames came upon them and burned their faces, so that 8 of them died. Oh, so sad. And when the king saw that his servants could not approach the fire, lest they should be burned, the king called to Abram, O servant of the God who is in heaven, go out from amidst the fire and come here before me. And Abram hearkened to the voice of the king, and he went out from the fire and came and stood before the king. And when Abram came out, the king and all his servants saw Abram coming before the king, with his lower garments upon him, for they were not burned, but the cord with which he was bound was burned. And the king said to Abram, How is it that you were not burned in the fire? And Abram said to the king, The God of heaven and earth, in whom I trust, and who has all in his power, he delivered me from the fire into which you did cast me. And Haran, the brother of Abram, was burned to ashes, and they sought for his body, and they found it consumed. And Haran was 82 years old when he died in the fire of Kasdim. That's so sad. I hope this is not a true story, because I feel bad for Haran. Poor child. What parent would do that to his own child? Horrible. And the king, princes, and inhabitants of the land, seeing that Abram was delivered from the fire, they came and bowed down to Abram. And Abram said to them, Do not bow down to me, but bow down to the God of the world who made you, and serve him, and go in his way, for it is he who delivered me from out of this fire, and it is he who created the souls and spirits of all men, and formed man in his mother's womb, and brought him out into the world, and it is he who will deliver those who trust in him from all pain. And this thing seemed very wonderful in the eyes of the king and princes, that Abram was saved from the fire, and that Haran was burned. And the king gave Abram many presents, and he gave him his 2 head servants from the king's house. The name of one was Oni, and the name of the other was Eliezer. And all the kings, princes, and servants gave Abram many gifts of silver and gold and pearl. And the king and his princes sent him away, and he went in peace. And Abram went out from the king in peace, and many of the king's servants followed him, and about 300 men joined him. And Abram returned on that day, and went to his father's house, he and the men that followed him. And Abram served the Lord his God all the days of his life, and he walked in his ways and followed his law. And from that day forward, Abram inclined the hearts of the sons of men to serve the Lord. I mean, that was a big testimony right there. Everybody saw it too. And at that time, Nahor and Abram took unto themselves wives, the daughters of their brother Haran. The wife of Nahor was Milcah, and the name of Abram's wife was Sarai. It makes sense because they wanted to continue his lineage too. And Sarai, wife of Abram, was barren. She had no offspring in those days. And at the expiration of 2 years from Abram's going out of the fire, that is, in the 52nd year of his life, behold, King Nimrod sat in Babel upon the throne, and the king fell asleep and dreamed that he was standing with his troops and hosts in a valley opposite the king's furnace. And he lifted up his eyes and saw a man in the likeness of Abram coming out from the furnace, and then he came and stood before the king with his drawn sword, and then sprang to the king with his sword. When the king fled from the man, for he was afraid, and while he was running, the man threw an egg upon the king's head, and the egg became a great river. And the king dreamed that all his troops sank in that river and died, and the king took flight with 3 men who were before him, and he escaped. And the king looked at these men, and they were clothed in princely dresses, as the garments of kings and the appearance and majesty of kings. And while they were running, the river again turned to an egg before the king, and there came out from the egg a young bird, which came before the king and flew at his head and plucked out the king's eye. Oh my gosh, this is so dramatic. And the king was grieved at the sight, and he awoke out of his sleep, and his spirit was agitated, and he felt a great terror. And in the morning the king rose from his couch in fear, and he ordered all the wise men and magicians to come before him, when the king related his dream to them. And the wise servant of the king, whose name was Anuki, answered the king, saying, This is nothing else but the evil of Abram and his seed, which will spring up against my lord and king in the latter days. And behold, the day will come when Abram and his seed and the children of his household will war with my king, and they will smite all the king's hosts and his troops. And as to what you have said concerning 3 men, which you did see, like unto yourself, and which did escape, this means that only you will escape with 3 kings from the kings of the earth who will be with you in battle. And that which you saw of the river, which turned to an egg as at first, and the young bird plucking out your eye, this means nothing else but the seed of Abram, which will slay the king in latter days. This is my king's dream, and this is its interpretation, and the dream is true, and the interpretation which your servant has given you is right. Wow, the confidence. Now therefore, my king, surely you know that it is now 52 years since your sages saw this at the birth of Abram, and if my king will suffer Abram to live in the earth, it will be to the injury of my lord and king. For all the days that Abram lives, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. For this was known formerly at his birth, and why will now my king slay him, that his evil may be kept from you in latter days? And Nimrod hearkened to the voice of Anuki, and he sent some of his servants in secret to go and seize Abram and bring him before the king to suffer death. Didn't they learn their lesson once? And Eliezer, Abram's servant, whom the king had given him, was at that time in the presence of the king, and he heard what Anuki had advised the king, and what the king had said, to cause Abram's death. And Eliezer said to Abram, Hasten, rise up and save your soul, that you may not die through the hands of the king. For thus did he see in a dream concerning you, and thus did Anuki interpret it, and thus also did Anuki advise the king concerning you. That's very nice. And Abram hearkened to the voice of Eliezer, and Abram hastened and ran for safety to the house of Noah and his son Shem, and he concealed himself there, and found a place of safety. And the king's servants came to Abram's house to seek him, but they could not find him. And they searched throughout the country, and he was not to be found. And they went and searched in every direction, and he was not to be met with. And when the king's servants could not find Abram, they returned to the king, but the king's anger against Abram was stilled, as they did not find him, and the king drove from his mind this matter concerning Abram. And Abram was concealed in Noah's house for 1 month, until the king had forgotten this matter, but Abram was still afraid of the king. And Terah came to see Abram his son secretly in the house of Noah, and Terah was very great in the eyes of the king. And Abram said to his father, "Do you not know that the king thinks to slay me and to annihilate my name from the earth by the advice of his wicked counselors? Now whom have you here, and what have you in this land? Arise, let us go together to the land of Canaan, that we may be delivered from his hand, lest you perish also through him in the latter days. Do you not know, or have you not heard, that it is not true love that Nimrod gives you all his honor, but it is only for his benefit that he bestows all this good upon you? And if he do unto you greater good than this, surely these are only vanities of the world, for wealth and riches cannot avail in the day of wrath and anger. Now therefore hearken to my voice, and let us arise and go to the land of Canaan, out of the reach of injury from Nimrod, and serve you the Lord, who created you in the earth, and it will be well with you, and cast away all the vain things which you pursue." And Abram ceased to speak when Noah and his son Shem answered Terah, saying, "True is the word which Abram has said unto you." And Terah hearkened to the voice of his son Abram, and Terah did all that Abram said, for this was from the Lord, that the king should not cause Abram's death. And I'm going to stop here. That was chapter 12.